I'm Crockett, 34, and this is the story of how my sister-in-law's cruel lies about my fertility nearly destroyed my marriage, until the day I walked into our family gathering with my twin babies and a lawyer who would change everything. Before I go deeper into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever stood your ground when someone failed to see your worth, feel free to let me know below. And if these kinds of stories speak to you, you're welcome to follow the channel for more. When I married Marcus 3 years ago, I thought I was gaining not just a husband, but a loving extended family. His sister Vanessa seemed welcoming at first, with her bright smile and warm hugs at family gatherings. I had no idea that behind that facade lived someone who would systematically try to destroy my marriage from the inside out. The trouble began subtly, about 6 months after our wedding. Marcus and I had been trying to conceive, like many newlyweds do. We weren't stressed about it yet, we knew these things took time. But somehow, Vanessa had appointed herself the family fertility expert, despite never having children of her own. She would corner me at family dinners, asking pointed questions about my cycle, my health, whether I'd been to a doctor yet. At first, I thought she was just being supportive, maybe overly curious. I answered her questions honestly, sharing that we were taking things naturally, that my doctor said everything looked normal during my recent checkup. What I didn't realize was that Vanessa was collecting this information like ammunition. Within weeks, I started noticing changes in how Marcus's family treated me. His mother, who had always been warm and inclusive, began giving me these pitying looks. His father would pat Marcus on the shoulder with this heavy sympathy, as if consoling him for some great loss. The aunts would whisper in corners when I walked into rooms, falling silent when they noticed me. I was confused and hurt, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. The shift was gradual enough that I questioned whether I was imagining things. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just how families worked, I wouldn't know, coming from a small family myself. But the feeling of being on the outside looking in grew stronger with each gathering. Then I started overhearing fragments of conversations. Words like barren and broken floating through the air when they thought I wasn't listening. I heard Marcus's aunt mention something about that poor boy and wasting his prime years. The pieces began falling into place, and I realized that somehow, the family had gotten the impression that I was infertile. The problem was, I wasn't. My doctor had assured me that everything was perfectly normal. My cycles were regular, my hormone levels were good, and there was no medical reason why I couldn't conceive. Marcus and I had simply been taking our time, enjoying being newlyweds, not stressing about timing. But apparently, that relaxed approach had been twisted into evidence of some deeper problem. I tried talking to Marcus about what I was experiencing, but he brushed off my concerns. His family loved me, he insisted. I was being paranoid. Vanessa was just trying to be helpful. She'd struggled with relationships herself and wanted to make sure we were happy. He couldn't see what was happening right in front of him, or maybe he didn't want to see it. His sister had always been the apple of his eye, the little sister who could do no wrong, but I knew something was deeply wrong when I overheard Vanessa on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends, describing me as Marcus's wife who can't give him children. She spoke about me like I was a piece of broken furniture, something defective that needed to be replaced. The casual cruelty in her voice made my blood run cold. This wasn't concern or curiosity, this was malice. That night, I confronted Marcus directly. I told him what I'd heard, how his family was treating me, and how his sister seemed to be spreading lies about my fertility. His reaction was worse than I'd expected. Instead of anger at his sister's behavior, he seemed almost relieved to have the topic out in the open. He admitted that Vanessa had mentioned her concerns about our inability to conceive. She told him that I was probably hiding fertility issues, that I was too proud to admit I needed help, and that I was wasting his time. The betrayal cut deep. Not only was his sister lying about me, but my own husband had been discussing our private medical situation with her behind my back. He'd been entertaining her theories about my body, my health, and our future together. The man I'd trusted with my heart had been letting his sister poison his mind against me for months. That conversation marked the beginning of a very dark period in our marriage. Every month that passed without a pregnancy became evidence supporting Vanessa's narrative. She'd made me into the villain of my own love story, and I was powerless to fight back without concrete proof of her manipulation. The worst part was watching Marcus slowly pull away from me, his eyes filled with the same pity I saw in the rest of his family. I realized I was fighting a war I didn't even know had been declared, and I was losing. Over the following months, Vanessa's campaign against me became more sophisticated and more vicious. She had positioned herself as the concerned sister, the family member brave enough to speak the hard truths that everyone else was too polite to mention. And because she wrapped her poison in concern, it was almost impossible to call out without Looking paranoid or defensive, she started attending family gatherings with printed articles about fertility treatments, conveniently leaving them on coffee tables where I couldn't help but see them. She'd bring up stories about couples who'd struggled with infertility, always with this meaningful look in my direction. At Marcus's birthday party, she actually brought a friend who'd recently had success with IVF, introducing her to me with the suggestion that we might have a lot to talk about. The humiliation was constant and subtle. She never directly accused me of anything, which made it impossible to defend myself without seeming like I was overreacting. When I tried to explain to Marcus how calculated her behavior was, he saw it as his sister trying to help. He couldn't understand why I was so resistant to her support. But the worst part was how she'd managed to turn my own medical privacy against me. Because Marcus and I had been keeping our fertility journey private, the family had no real information to counter Vanessa's implications. My silence became evidence of shame, my reluctance to discuss intimate details became proof that I was hiding something serious. She started making comments about how some women just aren't meant to be mothers, and how nature has its own way of selecting. These weren't directed at me specifically, but they were said in my presence, with enough emphasis that everyone understood the subtext. She'd talk about how important it was for Marcus to have children, how he'd always dreamed of being a father, how devastating it would be if that dream never came true. The family began treating Marcus like a victim of my inadequacy. They'd pull him aside for private conversations, offering comfort for his situation. His mother started mentioning single women she knew, successful women who were ready to settle down and start families. The implications were clear: I was a temporary obstacle to Marcus's happiness, and they were already looking for my replacement. What made it even more painful was that some part of me began to believe the narrative. When month after month passed without conception, I started wondering if maybe there was something wrong with me that the doctors had missed. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I was broken in some fundamental way. The constant doubt and stress began affecting my health, my sleep, my relationship with Marcus. I found myself avoiding family gatherings, making excuses to stay home. But my absence only fueled more speculation. Vanessa would express concern about my emotional instability and suggest that perhaps the stress of trying to conceive was affecting my mental health. She painted my withdrawal as evidence of guilt and shame, rather than the natural response of someone being systematically emotionally abused. Marcus began coming home from family visits with a different energy. He'd be distant, thoughtful, sometimes almost angry. I could see him looking at me with questions in his eyes, wondering if his sister might be right about me. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was eroding, and I felt powerless to stop it. The breaking point came when I discovered that Vanessa had been intercepting mail from my fertility clinic. She'd somehow convinced the postal worker that she was helping me manage my medical affairs, and she'd been opening and reading my appointment confirmations and test results. She knew everything about my medical journey, every detail of my perfectly normal fertility workup, and she'd been using that information to craft her lies more convincingly. When I confronted her about this violation, she didn't even try to deny it. She claimed she was trying to help, that she was concerned about my denial about my fertility issues. She said someone needed to be the adult in the situation since I was clearly too emotional to handle the truth. The gaslighting was so complete, so confident, that for a moment I actually questioned my own reality. I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight Vanessa's lies with more words or pleas for Marcus to see the truth. I was going to wait, and I was going to gather evidence, and when the time was right, I was going to destroy her credibility so completely that she'd never be able to manipulate anyone in this family again. I had no idea that life was about to hand me the perfect opportunity to do exactly that. The humiliation reached its peak at Marcus's parents' anniversary celebration. It was a big family gathering: aunts, uncles, cousins, close family friends. The kind of event where everyone came together to celebrate love and commitment. Instead, it became the stage for the most devastating public attack on my character I'd ever experienced. I'd been feeling unwell for weeks, exhausted and nauseous, but I attributed it to stress. The constant emotional warfare with Vanessa had taken its toll on my physical health. I'd lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and found myself crying at unexpected moments. Marcus noticed but interpreted my distress as confirmation of his sister's theories about my emotional instability. During the dinner, as everyone was sharing stories about lasting love and family bonds, Vanessa stood up to make a toast. She spoke beautifully about her parents' marriage, about the joy of watching love grow over decades, about the blessing of grandchildren and the continuation of family legacy. Then she turned to Marcus and me, and her tone shifted. "I think we all know that not every marriage is blessed with the same gifts," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Some couples face challenges that test their commitment to each other. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is acknowledge when those challenges might be insurmountable. The room fell silent. I could feel every eye on me, the weight of their pity and judgment pressing down like a physical force. Marcus looked confused, not understanding where his sister was heading with her speech. But I knew. I'd been anticipating this moment for months. Marcus has always dreamed of being a father, she continued. He used to talk about teaching his children to play baseball, about family vacations and bedtime stories. We all know how much family means to him. And I think it's time we all acknowledge that some dreams require difficult choices. She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she looked directly at me. Crockett, I know this is hard to hear, but maybe it's time to consider whether holding on to this marriage is fair to Marcus. He deserves the chance to have children, and if you can't give him that. She let the sentence hang in the air, incomplete but perfectly clear. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the flush of humiliation burning across my face. Every person in that room was staring at me, waiting for my response to this public execution of my marriage. Marcus looked stunned, his mouth slightly open, clearly unprepared for his sister's direct attack, but then something shifted inside me. Instead of the shame and defensiveness I'd been carrying for months, I felt a sudden, crystal-clear anger. Not the hot, emotional anger that makes you say things you regret, but the cold, calculated anger that makes you dangerous. I realized in that moment that I was done being Vanessa's victim. I stood up slowly, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. That's interesting advice, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm and clear. Especially coming from someone who's been intercepting my medical mail and spreading lies about my fertility for over a year. The room's energy shifted immediately. Vanessa's confident smile faltered. Crockett, I don't know what you're talking about. You're clearly upset. I'm talking about the appointment confirmations you've been stealing from my mailbox. I'm talking about the perfectly normal test results you've been reading and then lying about to this family. I'm talking about the systematic campaign you've been running to destroy my marriage because. I paused, looking around the room at all the faces staring at me in shock. Actually, I'm not sure why. Maybe you can explain that to everyone. Marcus finally found his voice. Crockett, what are you saying? Vanessa would never. Marcus, your sister has been opening my medical mail for months. She knows every detail of my fertility workup. She knows that my hormone levels are perfect, that my cycles are regular, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with my ability to conceive. And she's been using that information to craft lies that sound just medical enough to be believable. I watched the blood drain from Vanessa's face. She hadn't expected me to fight back, certainly not publicly, and definitely not with facts. Her entire strategy had been built on my silence and compliance. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're having some kind of breakdown. Everyone can see, what everyone can see, I interrupted, is that you've been manipulating this family for months. You've been reading my private medical information, violating federal privacy laws, and using what you learned to spread lies about me. The question is why? The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus's parents looked confused and upset. His aunts were whispering to each other, trying to process what they were hearing. Marcus himself looked like he'd been hit by a truck, his gaze moving back and forth between his sister and me. I have copies of the mail you stole, I continued, though I was bluffing. I have documentation of your lies. And I have proof that you've been systematically trying to destroy my marriage. So maybe instead of giving me advice about letting Marcus go, you should explain to this family why you've been so determined to get rid of me. Vanessa's composure cracked completely. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. He deserves better than someone who can't even what? I demanded. Can't even have children? Because that's never been true, and you know it. You've known it all along. The confrontation had spiraled beyond anything I'd planned, but I realized I didn't care. I was tired of being the victim in someone else's twisted game. I was tired of watching my marriage crumble under the weight of lies. And I was especially tired of being made to feel ashamed of something that was never my fault. What I didn't tell anyone in that room was that I was already carrying the proof that would make all of Vanessa's lies irrelevant. The nausea and exhaustion I'd been experiencing wasn't from stress. The pregnancy test I'd taken that morning had shown two clear lines. Not only was I pregnant, but the early ultrasound had revealed something that would make this entire nightmare seem even more absurd in retrospect, that I was carrying twins. The morning after the anniversary disaster, I sat in my doctor's office staring at an ultrasound screen that would change everything. Two tiny heartbeats flickered back at me, strong and steady. Twins. After all of Vanessa's lies about my fertility, after months of being treated like a broken woman who couldn't give Marcus children, I was carrying not one but two babies. Doctor Martinez smiled as she pointed out the 2 gestational sacs. Everything looks perfect, Crockett. Based on your dates, you're about 8 weeks along. Both babies are developing normally, and your hormone levels are excellent. She paused, studying my face. You don't look as happy as I expected. Is everything okay? How could I explain that this moment of joy was complicated by months of psychological warfare? That instead of feeling pure excitement, I was calculating how this pregnancy would expose every lie that had been told about me? That I was already planning how to use my own children as evidence in a battle I never should have had to fight. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. The smart thing would be to tell Marcus immediately, to share this joy with my husband and let the truth speak for itself. But I couldn't shake the memory of something I'd overheard just weeks earlier. Vanessa had been talking to Marcus in the kitchen during a family barbecue, and I'd heard her say, "Don't be surprised if she claims to be pregnant soon. Desperate women do desperate things." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Even if I announced my pregnancy, Vanessa would find a way to poison it. She'd suggest I was lying, or that I'd gotten pregnant through some deception, or that I was using the pregnancy to manipulate Marcus. She'd already laid the groundwork to question anything positive that happened in my reproductive life. That's when I made a decision that would define the next several months of my life. I wasn't going to tell anyone about the pregnancy until I could prove, beyond any doubt, that Vanessa had been lying all along. I was going to let her dig her hole deeper, let her continue spreading her poison, and then I was going to present evidence so overwhelming that she'd never be able to manipulate anyone in this family again. The decision meant I'd have to hide morning sickness, fatigue, and a growing belly while under constant scrutiny from someone actively looking for signs of deception. It meant I'd have to endure more months of being treated like a failure while carrying the ultimate proof of my fertility. It meant I'd have to lie to my husband about the most important thing happening in our lives, but I was beyond caring about taking the high road. Vanessa had declared war on my marriage, and I was going to win it. The hardest part was hiding the symptoms from Marcus. I started getting up earlier to throw up in the guest bathroom, claiming I was having trouble sleeping. I blamed my fatigue on stress from work. I started wearing looser clothes and buying groceries for meals I was too nauseous to eat. The deception felt wrong, but every time I wavered, I remembered the humiliation of that anniversary dinner and steeled my resolve. Meanwhile, Vanessa seemed energized by our public confrontation. Instead of backing down, she doubled down on her campaign. She started making comments about my erratic behavior and emotional outbursts. She suggested to family members that my accusations against her were signs of a deeper mental health crisis. She painted herself as the victim of my unstable paranoia. "I'm worried about her," I heard her telling Marcus's mother. "The stress of infertility can really affect a woman's mental state. Maybe she should talk to someone professional before this gets worse." The gaslighting was so complete, so confident, that I sometimes wondered if I was losing my mind. Here I was, pregnant with twins, being told I was mentally unstable because I couldn't have children. The irony was so absurd it was almost funny. Marcus began suggesting I see a therapist, not because he thought I needed help, but because he hoped it might help me process our fertility challenges. He'd been completely convinced by his sister's narrative that I was in denial about my reproductive limitations. The man whose children I was carrying believed I was incapable of carrying children. I used my doctor's appointments as opportunities to document everything. I requested copies of all my test results, all my ultrasound images, all my medical records going back to before my marriage. I was building a file that would prove, medically and legally, that I had never been infertile. That every test had been normal. That Vanessa's entire campaign had been built on lies she'd known were lies from the beginning, but as my pregnancy progressed, hiding it became more challenging. I was starting to show, despite the loose clothes. My energy levels were unpredictable. I had to excuse myself from family dinners to throw up, which only fueled more speculation about my emotional problems. The breaking point came when I overheard Vanessa talking to a family friend, describing me as obsessed with getting pregnant and suggesting that I might be faking symptoms for attention. She was already preparing the family for the possibility that I might claim to be pregnant, setting up her narrative that any pregnancy announcement would be either a lie or a desperate manipulation. That conversation made me realize that my original plan wasn't enough. It wasn't sufficient to simply prove I could get pregnant. I needed to prove that Vanessa had been deliberately, maliciously lying about me for months. I needed to expose not just her lies, but her method of lying, her theft of my medical information, and her systematic campaign to destroy my marriage. I needed legal help. The next morning, I called a lawyer who specialized in defamation and privacy violations. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Vanessa had made this into a legal matter the moment she started stealing my mail. Now I was going to treat It like 1.m why children deserve to be born into a family where their mother was respected and their father's sister couldn't poison every family gathering with lies. I was going to make sure that happened, whatever it took. Living with a secret pregnancy while being constantly scrutinized was like being an undercover agent in my own life. Every day brought new challenges as I navigated hiding my condition, while systematically documenting the lies being told about me. I was fighting on two fronts, protecting my unborn children and building a legal case against my sister-in-law. The lawyer I consulted, Jennifer Chen, was a sharp woman in her 50s, who specialized in family law and defamation cases. When I explained my situation, she listened without judgment, taking notes as I described months of psychological manipulation and mail theft. Her first advice was crucial: start documenting everything immediately. What your sister-in-law has been doing constitutes several potential crimes, she told me. Mail theft is a federal offense. Interfering with your medical privacy could be grounds for a civil suit. But we need evidence that will hold up in court, not just your word against hers. I began carrying a small recorder in my purse, documenting every conversation where Vanessa made claims about my fertility. I started screenshotting text messages where she made references to my supposed medical issues. I requested detailed records from my doctor's office, establishing a clear timeline of my normal fertility workup alongside Vanessa's lies. The hardest part was maintaining the charade at home with Marcus. My pregnancy symptoms were becoming more pronounced. The twins were making their presence known through constant nausea and exhaustion. I found myself making excuses to avoid family gatherings where I'd have to hide my condition while being attacked for the very condition. I was secretly disproving. Marcus interpreted my withdrawal as confirmation of his sister's theories about my mental state. He'd come home from family visits with this concerned, patronizing energy that made me want to scream. He'd suggest gentle activities like yoga or meditation, treatments for the stress he believed was causing our fertility issues. The irony of my fertile, pregnant body being treated as broken and barren was almost unbearable, but I pushed through. Because I could see the bigger picture. Every lie Vanessa told was being recorded or witnessed. Every family member who nodded along with her narrative was being documented. I was building a case that would not only vindicate me but protect future family members from her manipulation. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Vanessa had been keeping copies of my stolen medical mail. During a family barbecue, I excused myself to use the bathroom and found a folder in her bedroom labeled Crockett's Medical. Inside were photocopies of appointment confirmations, test results, and doctor's notes, all stolen from my mailbox over the course of months. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands shaking as I realized the extent of her violation. She hadn't just been stealing my mail. She'd been building a dossier of my private medical information. She'd been studying my normal test results while telling everyone I was infertile. The malice was breathtaking. That folder became the cornerstone of my legal case. It proved theft, proved invasion of privacy, and most importantly, proved that Vanessa had known all along that I was perfectly fertile. Every lie she'd told had been calculated and deliberate, made with full knowledge of the truth. Jennifer was thrilled when I showed her the photographs. "This changes everything," she said. "We can prove she had access to information that contradicted everything she was telling your family. This isn't just gossip or speculation, this is deliberate defamation based on stolen private documents." As my pregnancy progressed toward the halfway point, I started planning the revelation that would end this nightmare. I wasn't just going to announce that I was pregnant, I was going to present a complete case showing exactly how Vanessa had manipulated everyone, exactly what laws she'd broken, and exactly what consequences she would face. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would let Vanessa dig her hole as deep as possible, then I would appear at the next major family gathering with undeniable proof of her lies. Not just my pregnancy, but twins, the ultimate evidence that there had never been anything wrong with my fertility. And I'd bring Jennifer with me to explain the legal implications of everything Vanessa had done. The twins were due in late spring, which meant they'd be born just before Marcus's birthday celebration. The same event where Vanessa had publicly humiliated me the year before would become the stage for her downfall. The symmetry felt like justice, but as I prepared for the confrontation that would change everything, I struggled with the toldness. Secrecy was taking on my marriage. Marcus and I had grown distant, our conversations strained by the weight of lies we were both carrying. He believed his sister's narrative about my mental instability and denial. I was carrying his children while he treated me like a fragile, delusional woman. Some nights, I lay awake feeling the babies move inside me, wondering if the victory I was planning would be worth the damage already done to our relationship. Could a marriage survive this level of deception, even if the deception had been necessary? Would Marcus be able to forgive me for keeping the pregnancy secret, even when he understood why I'd done it? But then I'd remember Vanessa's voice at that anniversary. dinner, suggesting I should leave Marcus so he could find someone who could give him children. I'd remember the humiliation, the isolation, the months of being treated like a failure. And I'd remember that I was doing this not just for myself, but for my children. They deserved to be born into a family where their mother was respected, where lies couldn't poison their relationships, where truth mattered more than manipulation. The countdown to my revelation had begun. In a few months, I would walk into a family gathering carrying the ultimate proof that every word Vanessa had spoken about me was a lie. And I would have a lawyer by my side to make sure she faced consequences for what she'd done. I was about to turn the tables on someone who had tried to destroy my life. And I was going to do it with the most beautiful evidence possible, my healthy, perfect children. By my second trimester, I was working closely with Jennifer to build what she called an airtight case against Vanessa. The evidence we'd gathered was damning, but Jennifer wanted to make sure we were prepared for every possible defense or counterattack. This wasn't just about exposing lies, it was about ensuring lasting consequences that would prevent future manipulation. Your sister-in-law is clearly intelligent and manipulative, Jennifer explained during one of our strategy sessions. She's been running a sophisticated psychological campaign for months. When we expose her, she's going to try to flip the narrative, make herself the victim, claim she was just concerned about family welfare. We need to be ready for that. The legal framework was complex but clear. Vanessa had committed multiple violations: mail theft, which was a federal crime, invasion of privacy through accessing my medical information, defamation through spreading false statements about my health, and what Jennifer termed intentional infliction of emotional distress through her systematic campaign against me. But beyond the legal violations, Jennifer identified something even more significant. What she's done could be classified as a form of domestic abuse, she told me. Psychological manipulation designed to isolate you from family support, undermine your marriage, and damage your mental health. Family courts take this very seriously, especially when children are involved. The mention of children brought up a crucial point in our strategy. My twins weren't just proof that Vanessa had lied about my fertility, they were potential future victims of her manipulative behavior. If she was willing to conduct a months-long campaign to destroy their mother's reputation, what might she do to them as they grew up? Jennifer suggested we document not just the lies about my fertility, but the pattern of manipulative behavior that could extend to other family members. We interviewed Marcus's cousins and discovered that Vanessa had spread damaging rumors about previous girlfriends and even other family members when it served her purposes. She had a history of using private information to control family narratives. The strategy we developed was multi-layered. First, we present overwhelming evidence of her crimes and lies at a family gathering where she couldn't control the narrative or prepare her defense. Second, we'd file legal charges immediately afterward, while the family was still processing the revelation. Third, we'd seek a restraining order preventing her from contacting me or my children, establishing legal protection for the future. But the most important element of our plan was timing. Jennifer advised waiting until after the twins were born to make our move. Pregnant women are seen as vulnerable, potentially emotional, she explained. But a mother with healthy babies in her arms, presenting evidence of systematic lies about her ability to have those babies, that's powerful beyond dispute. The waiting was excruciating. As my pregnancy became impossible to hide, I had to make a decision about when and how to reveal it to Marcus. Jennifer advised against keeping the secret much longer. You need your husband as an ally when this comes out, she said. If he finds out about the pregnancy at the same time he learns about the legal case, he might feel as manipulated as everyone else. The conversation with Marcus was one of the hardest of my life. I waited until we were alone on a quiet Sunday morning, then simply handed him the ultrasound photos showing 2 babies, clearly dated from months earlier. I watched his face cycle through confusion, joy, shock, and finally, a dawning understanding of what my secrecy meant. "You've been pregnant this whole time?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. While Vanessa was saying you couldn't. He couldn't finish the sentence. I explained everything: the stolen mail, the documented lies, the legal case we were building. I showed him the evidence we'd gathered, the photographs of my medical records found in his sister's bedroom, the recordings of her false statements about my health. I watched him realize that his sister hadn't just been wrong about me, she'd been deliberately, maliciously lying while in possession of information that proved her lies. His reaction was more intense than I'd expected. The betrayal he felt wasn't just about the lies she'd told, but about how completely she'd manipulated him. He'd been supporting her narrative, had been distant and sometimes cold with me, based on information he now realized was fabricated. The guilt and anger warred in his expression as he processed the full scope of what had happened. "I'm so sorry," he said, and I could see tears in his eyes. "I should have believed you. I should have seen what she was doing. I let her convince me that you were. He couldn't say the words. You let her convince you that I was lying about my own body, I finished for him. That I was too delusional or manipulative to understand my own medical situation. That I was the problem in our marriage. The conversation lasted hours. Marcus had to work through his own role in enabling Vanessa's abuse, his failure to protect me, and his complicity in making me feel isolated and unwelcome in his family. But by the end, he was fully committed to our legal strategy. He wanted justice not just for what had been done to me, but for what had been done to our marriage and our unborn children. Jennifer was pleased when I told her about Marcus's reaction. Having your husband's full support changes everything, she said. Now it's not just your word against hers, it's a united front exposing her behavior. We spent the final weeks of my pregnancy finalizing our evidence and preparing for the confrontation. Jennifer would attend Marcus's birthday party. As our family lawyer, ostensibly there to discuss estate planning. No one would suspect her real purpose until it was too late for Vanessa to prepare any defense. The twins were born on a beautiful spring morning, healthy and perfect. As I held them for the first time, I thought about how they were living proof. That every cruel word spoken about me had been a lie. They were evidence of my body's ability to do exactly what Vanessa had claimed it couldn't do. They were the ultimate vindication, but more than that, they were the future I was fighting to protect. I wouldn't let them grow up in a family where lies could flourish, where manipulation was tolerated, where truth was less important than keeping peace. They deserved better than that. We all did. The showdown was coming, and I was ready. The twins arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, after a long but manageable labor. Isabella Rose and Gabriel James, two perfect, healthy babies who would become the most powerful evidence in the case I'd been building for months. As I held them in the hospital, still exhausted from delivery, I felt a fierce protectiveness. That went beyond normal maternal instincts. These children would never know a world where their mother was considered less than whole. Marcus was transformed by fatherhood in a way that both thrilled and broke my heart. The joy on his face as he held his children was pure and uncomplicated, but I could see the shadow of regret there too. He'd spent months believing his sister's lies about my fertility, treating me with a mixture of pity and frustration, when all along I'd been carrying his children. The weight of that realization was heavy on both of us. I can't believe I almost lost this, he whispered, cradling Isabella while Gabriel slept in my arms. I can't believe I let her convince me that this wasn't possible. The hospital stay was peaceful, a calm before the storm I knew was coming. Jennifer visited to finalize our strategy, cooing over the babies while discussing legal tactics. The plan was simple but devastating. Marcus's birthday party was scheduled for the following Saturday. Vanessa would be expecting me to stay home. With sick excuses, as I had for most family gatherings during my secret pregnancy. Instead, I would arrive with the twins, my lawyer, and a folder full of evidence that would end her campaign of lies forever. She's told everyone you're having a breakdown about your fertility issues, Jennifer reminded me as she reviewed our timeline. She's been preparing the family for the possibility that you might not even attend Marcus's birthday. Your appearance with healthy newborn twins is going to be shocking enough. But when we present the evidence of her systematic deception, it's going to be devastating. The week between the birth and the party was surreal. I was experiencing the normal challenges of new motherhood, sleepless nights, nursing twins, the physical recovery from childbirth, while also preparing for what would essentially be a legal ambush of my sister-in-law. Marcus handled the family communications, telling everyone simply that we had good news to share at the party but not elaborating. Vanessa called him twice that week, fishing for information. She was concerned, she said, about my mental state, and whether I was handling the stress appropriately. She suggested that maybe the party wasn't the right time for whatever announcement we were planning, that perhaps we should wait until I was more stable. Marcus told me after the second call. She can sense something's changed, but she can't figure out what. She keeps asking if you're okay, if you need professional help, if this announcement is something I should be worried about. The irony was delicious. Vanessa, who had spent months portraying me as delusional and unstable, was now genuinely worried that I might be having some kind of breakdown. She couldn't have imagined that my instability was actually the focused determination of a mother protecting her children from future manipulation. On the morning of the party, I dressed carefully. I wanted to look strong, healthy, radiant, everything that contradicted the narrative of a broken, desperate woman that Vanessa had been promoting. The twins were dressed in matching outfits that Marcus had picked out, tiny perfection that would speak louder than any words I could say. Jennifer arrived at our house an hour before the party, reviewing our presentation one final time. She would introduce herself as our family lawyer, initially discussing estate planning and wills. Now that we had children, Only after Vanessa had relaxed into the normal family gathering would we reveal the true purpose of her presence. Remember, Jennifer coached me, let her dig the hole deeper. If she makes any comments about your fertility or mental health, don't react defensively. Just let her talk. The more lies she tells in front of witnesses, the stronger our case becomes. The drive to Marcus's parents' house felt like going into battle. I sat in the back seat between the twins' car seats, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, knowing that this would be the last time I made this journey as the family scapegoat. When I returned home, either I would have achieved justice and redemption, or I would have burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. Marcus squeezed my hand as we pulled into the driveway. Are you ready for this? He asked. I looked at my sleeping children, thought about months of humiliation and lies, and felt a calm certainty settle over me. I've been ready for this since the day she first called me broken. The moment we walked through the front door carrying the babies, the entire energy of the party shifted. The conversation stopped. The laughter died. Every person in that room stared at us in shock, their minds trying to process what they were seeing. Marcus and I, carrying 2 healthy newborn babies, when the family narrative had been that I was infertile and possibly delusional about my fertility issues. Vanessa's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. She recovered quickly, rushing over with exaggerated excitement. Oh my God, Marcus. Crockett. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? These babies are beautiful. But I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was already calculating how to manage this development, how to spin the presence of my children in a way that didn't completely destroy her months of lies. I could almost watch her searching for explanations that would salvage her credibility. We wanted to surprise everyone, I said calmly, enjoying the moment of pure shock before the real confrontation began. Meet Isabella and Gabriel. They're 3 days old. The family crowded around, full of questions and congratulations, but also clearly confused. Marcus's mother kept looking back and forth between the babies and Vanessa, as if trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd been told about my fertility issues. 3 days old, his aunt asked. But we thought. Weren't you having trouble? That's actually something we need to discuss, Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone pay attention. There are some things this family needs to know about what's been happening over the past year. Vanessa stepped forward, still trying to control the narrative. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, she said quickly. Crockett's been under so much stress about fertility issues, and sometimes when people want something badly enough, they can convince themselves. Vanessa, I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made her stop talking. I think it's time for the truth. The whole truth. About everything. I looked around the room at the confused, expectant faces of Marcus's family. These people had spent months pitying my husband for being married to a woman who couldn't give him children. They'd treated me with condescension and false sympathy, believing I was too proud or delusional to accept my fertility limitations. Now they were looking at the evidence that every word they'd believed was a lie. My beautiful, healthy children were living proof that there had never been anything wrong with my ability to conceive. And in a few minutes, they were going to learn exactly how those lies had been created and maintained. Jennifer, I said, turning to my lawyer, I think it's time to explain to everyone what you've discovered about the theft of my medical records and the systematic defamation campaign that's been conducted against me. The room fell silent again. But this time it was the silence of people realizing they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics. Vanessa's face had gone completely pale. Jennifer stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. She introduced herself professionally, explaining that she'd been representing our family in what had started as estate planning but had evolved into something much more serious. The family listened politely, still processing the shock of the twins' presence, not yet understanding that they were about to witness the complete destruction of someone they'd trusted. Before we discuss wills and guardianship for Isabella and Gabriel, Jennifer began, there's a legal matter that needs to be addressed. Crockett has been the victim of a systematic campaign of defamation, privacy violations, and emotional abuse that has been conducted by a member of this family. The silence in the room was absolute. I could see family members glancing at each other, trying to understand what was happening. Vanessa stood frozen, her face a mask of growing panic, but she hadn't yet realized how complete her exposure was about to be. Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Over the past 8 months, someone in this family has been intercepting Crockett's medical mail, reading her private health information, and then spreading false information about her fertility based on deliberate misrepresentation of that medical data. That's ridiculous, Vanessa said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. No one would do something like that. Actually, someone did exactly that, Jennifer replied calmly. We have photographic evidence of stolen medical documents, recorded conversations containing false statements made with knowledge of contradictory medical evidence, and witness testimony documenting a pattern of deliberate defamation. I watched the family's faces as they began to understand the implications of what Jennifer was saying. Marcus's mother looked confused and upset. His father had the expression of a man realizing he'd been manipulated. The aunts and cousins were staring at Vanessa with growing suspicion. "Vanessa," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, "would you like to explain to everyone how you got copies of my fertility test results? The ones that showed completely normal hormone levels, regular ovulation, and no fertility issues whatsoever." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Every eye in the room was now focused on Vanessa, waiting for her response. She looked like a cornered animal, her usual confidence completely shattered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the denial sounded hollow even to her. Jennifer reached into her folder and pulled out photographs. "These are copies of medical documents found in your bedroom, Vanessa. Crockett's private medical records, photocopied and filed under her name. Records that prove she has never had any fertility issues. Records that directly contradict every statement you've made about her health to this family." I watched Marcus's parents' faces as they processed this information. They were beginning to understand that they'd been manipulated, that their treatment of me had been based on deliberate lies told by their own daughter. Furthermore, Jennifer continued, "Mail theft is a federal crime. Accessing someone's private medical information without authorization is a violation of privacy laws. Using that information to spread false statements about someone's health constitutes defamation. Vanessa, you've committed multiple felonies." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Family members were talking over each other, asking questions, expressing disbelief. But I kept my eyes on Vanessa, watching her realize that her months of careful manipulation were collapsing in minutes. "You planned this," she said, pointing at me with a shaking hand. "You got pregnant and planned this whole thing to make me look bad." The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that several family members actually laughed. But I didn't find it funny. It was the final proof of how twisted her thinking had become, how completely she'd convinced herself that she was the victim in the situation she'd created. "Vanessa," I said, shifting Gabriel to get more comfortable, "I got pregnant because I'm fertile. I've always been fertile. You knew I was fertile because you stole my medical records that proved I was fertile. You spent months telling this family I couldn't have children while in possession of documentation that I could have children. The question isn't whether I planned this. The question is why you did." Marcus stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "She's right, Vanessa. I've seen the evidence. You've been lying to all of us for months. You made me believe my wife was hiding fertility problems from me. You made me doubt my own marriage based on lies you knew were lies. I was trying to protect you." Vanessa burst out, her composure finally cracking completely. "She's not good enough for you. She never was. You could have had anyone, Marcus. You could have had someone who would give you the family you deserve without all this drama and manipulation." The words hung in the air like a confession. She'd just admitted, in front of the entire family, that her campaign against me had never been about fertility or medical concerns. It had been about her belief that I wasn't worthy of her brother. "So you decided to destroy my reputation and my marriage because you didn't think I was good enough?" I asked, my voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. "You committed federal crimes and emotional abuse because you wanted Marcus to choose someone else?" Marcus's father stood up, his face red with anger. "Vanessa, how could you do this? How could you lie to us for months? How could you make us treat Crockett this way based on lies? And these babies," Marcus's mother said, looking at Isabella and Gabriel with tears in her eyes, "we could have been part of Crockett's pregnancy. We could have celebrated with them, supported them. Instead, we treated her like she was broken because of your lies." I could see the family dynamics shifting. In real time. The people who had treated me with pity and condescension for months were realizing they'd been manipulated into emotional abuse. The guilt and anger were palpable, but it was directed at Vanessa now, not at me. "Vanessa," Jennifer said, "Crockett has grounds to press federal charges for mail theft, file a civil suit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and seek a restraining order to protect her children from future manipulation. Given the evidence we have, these cases would likely be successful. However," I added, still holding my son, "I'm willing to consider alternatives if you publicly acknowledge what you've done and agree to stay away from my family." It was an offer of mercy I probably shouldn't have made, but I was tired of fighting. I had my children, I had my vindication, and I had my husband's support. What I wanted now was peace, not prolonged legal battles. Vanessa looked around the room at the faces of her family, faces filled with disappointment, anger, and betrayal. She'd lost their trust completely, and she knew it. The power she'd wielded through manipulation was gone forever. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the apology sounded more like defeat than genuine remorse. "Sorry doesn't undo months of emotional abuse," Marcus said firmly. "Sorry doesn't rebuild the trust you destroyed. Sorry doesn't give Crockett back the pregnancy experience you stole from her." I looked around the room at the family that had treated me as an outsider for so long, holding the children that proved every word spoken against me was a lie. The victory felt hollow in some ways. I would have preferred to never need vindication in the first place, but it was complete. The truth was finally out, and it would stay out. My children would grow up knowing their mother had fought for them before they were even born, and that truth had ultimately prevailed over manipulation. The silence that followed Vanessa's defeated apology was heavy with the weight of broken trust and shattered family dynamics. I could see each family member processing not just what they'd learned about Vanessa's lies, but their own role in perpetuating the abuse I'd endured. The guilt on their faces was almost as painful to watch as the original rejection had been. To experience. Marcus's mother was the first to approach me, tears streaming down her face. "Crockett, I am so deeply sorry," she whispered, reaching out tentatively toward Isabella. "I believed every word she said. I treated you like you were. Like there was something wrong with you. And all this time, you were carrying our grandchildren." The pain in her voice was genuine, but it couldn't erase months of cold treatment and pitying looks. Still, I could see she was genuinely horrified by her role in what had happened. "I know you believed her," I said quietly. "That was the point. She made her lies believable because she had access to my real medical information." Marcus's father stood with his hands clenched at his sides, staring at Vanessa with an expression I'd never seen before. "You made us complicit in abuse," he said, his voice shaking with controlled anger. "You made us treat Crockett like she was less than family, like she was defective. Do you understand what you've done?" Vanessa had collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. When she looked up, I could see that she was crying, but I wasn't sure if it was from remorse or from the shock of being exposed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said weakly. "You didn't mean for what to go this far?" Jennifer asked sharply. "The mail theft? The invasion of privacy? The months of systematic lies? Which part was accidental, Vanessa?" The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. None of it had been accidental. Every step of Vanessa's campaign had been calculated and deliberate. She'd stolen my mail, copied my medical records, and crafted lies that sounded just credible enough to convince people who wanted to believe her. Marcus was pacing the room like a caged animal, his anger barely contained. "I defended you," he said to his sister. "When Crockett tried to tell me what you were doing, I defended you. I told my wife she was being paranoid because I couldn't believe my own sister would do something so cruel. I was trying to protect you," Vanessa repeated weakly, but the excuse sounded pathetic even to her. "Protect me from what?" Marcus demanded. "From being married to a woman who loves me? From having healthy children? From being happy? What exactly were you protecting me from?" The family members who had treated me with such coldness were now approaching with tentative apologies, wanting to hold the babies, asking about their health and birth weights. The transformation was jarring, from being treated as a failure to being celebrated as a mother, all in the span of an hour. But I understood their confusion. They genuinely believed they were being kind by not asking difficult questions about my fertility struggles. They thought they were sparing my feelings by not pressing for details about treatments or timelines. Jennifer was taking notes throughout these interactions, documenting the family's acknowledgement of how they'd treated me based on Vanessa's lies. Even though I'd offered to avoid criminal charges, she wanted a complete record of the impact Vanessa's actions had had on my relationships and mental health. "Crockett," Marcus's aunt said, approaching carefully, "I need you to know that I'm horrified by how I treated you. I made assumptions, I participated in conversations about your personal life, I was unkind because I believed lies. There's no excuse for that." These individual apologies continued for nearly an hour, each family member grappling with their own guilt and trying to express remorse for their role in my isolation. Some of the apologies felt genuine, others felt more like attempts to absolve themselves of responsibility. But I accepted them all with grace, understanding that repairing these relationships would be a long process that extended far beyond this single conversation. The practical consequences for Vanessa were swift and severe. Marcus's parents asked her to leave their house immediately, making it clear that she was no longer welcome at family gatherings until she received professional help for her manipulative behavior. His father, who worked in finance, was particularly upset about the legal implications of her actions and insisted that she needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done. "You committed federal crimes, Vanessa," he said firmly. "Mail theft, invasion of privacy, defamation. If Crockett chooses to press charges, you could go to prison. Do you understand that? Jennifer outlined the legal options available to us, both criminal and civil. The evidence was overwhelming, and she was confident that any charges we pressed would be successful. But she also emphasized that legal proceedings would be lengthy and emotionally draining, particularly with newborn twins to care for. Marcus and I had discussed this extensively during the week before the confrontation. While we wanted accountability, we also wanted to focus on our new family and rebuilding our marriage. The public exposure of Vanessa's lies was justice enough for us, as long as she stayed away from our children and stopped her manipulative behavior. We settled on a restraining order that would legally prevent Vanessa from contacting me or the twins directly, along with a written acknowledgement of her actions that could be used in court if she ever attempted similar behavior in the future. She would also be required to pay for therapy focused on understanding the impact of manipulative behavior on families. As the family gathering wound down, I found myself sitting in the living room where I'd been publicly humiliated just months earlier, now holding my healthy children while family members who had once pitted me asked for advice about their own relationships and fertility journeys. The transformation was complete, but it felt surreal. Marcus sat beside me, gently stroking Gabriel's tiny hand. "I'm so sorry," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you. I should have seen what she was doing." "You weren't trained to recognize systematic manipulation," I replied. "She's your sister. You trusted her because that's what family is supposed to do. She violated that trust, not you." But even as I offered him forgiveness, I knew our marriage would need significant work to recover from the damage that had been done. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply rebuild itself through apologies and explanations. We would need counseling, honest conversations, and time to heal from the trauma of the past year. The most important thing, though, was that my children would grow up knowing the truth. They would never wonder if their mother was worthy of love and respect. They would never doubt their own legitimacy or their place in the family. That victory made everything else worthwhile. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, I sat in our living room watching Marcus read bedtime stories to Isabella and Gabriel. The twins were thriving, healthy and happy, completely unaware of the battle that had been fought to secure their place in this family. As I watched my husband gently turn pages while making silly voices for different characters, I reflected on how far we'd all come. The healing hadn't been immediate or easy. Marcus and I spent months in couples therapy, working through the damage that Vanessa's manipulation had caused to our marriage. The hardest part wasn't forgiving him for believing his sister's lies, it was helping him forgive himself. He carried tremendous guilt about not protecting me, about allowing me to be isolated and emotionally abused while I was carrying his children. "I failed you when you needed me most," he said during one particularly difficult therapy session. "I was supposed to be your partner, your protector, and instead I became part of the problem." Our therapist, Dr. Sarah Williams, helped us understand that we'd both been victims of sophisticated psychological manipulation. Vanessa had known exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to exploit the natural trust between siblings and the inevitable insecurities of a marriage facing fertility challenges. Understanding the calculated nature of what had been done to us helped us separate the manipulation from our actual relationship. The family dynamics took longer to repair. While everyone had apologized and expressed horror at Vanessa's behavior, the damage to trust ran deep on all sides. Marcus's parents struggled with guilt about their treatment of me, but they also had to grapple with the reality that their daughter was capable of sustained, malicious deception. Family gatherings were awkward for months as everyone learned to navigate these new truths. Some relationships recovered fully. Marcus's mother became a devoted grandmother who seemed determined to make up for lost time. She helped with the twins, celebrated every milestone, and became one of my strongest allies in the family. His father, who had always been more reserved, made genuine efforts to build a relationship with me based on respect rather than obligation. Others remained strained. Some family members seemed to blame me for exposing Vanessa rather than Vanessa for creating the situation in the first place. They treated the legal consequences she faced as excessive, suggesting that family problems should stay in the family. These people gradually distanced themselves from us, and honestly, I was grateful for their absence. Vanessa herself had moved to another state shortly after the confrontation. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me or the children directly, but I heard through family that she'd entered therapy and was attempting to rebuild her life. I felt no satisfaction in her exile, but I also felt no guilt about it. She'd made choices that had consequences, and those consequences were hers to bear. The most important healing happened between Marcus and me. In therapy, we learned to communicate about difficult topics without the defensive patterns we'd developed during the worst of Vanessa's campaign. We established new boundaries with extended family, making it clear that our nuclear family's well-being came before keeping peace with relatives. We created protocols for handling future conflicts that prioritized our marriage over family pressure. Most significantly, we learned to trust each other again. Marcus proved through consistent actions that he would never again allow anyone to come between us or threaten our family's stability. I learned to communicate my concerns more directly rather than hoping he would simply see what I was seeing. We both became better partners through the painful process of rebuilding. The twins provided daily reminders of what we'd almost lost and what we'd fought to protect. Every milestone, their first smiles, their first attempts at rolling over, their emerging personalities, felt like evidence of the life we'd preserved despite the attempts to destroy it. They would grow up in a family where truth mattered, where manipulation wasn't tolerated, and where their mother's worth was never questioned. I often thought about the woman I'd been a year earlier, newly married and hopeful about building a family with Marcus. She'd been naive about the potential for cruelty within families, unprepared for the sophisticated nature of psychological abuse, and too trusting of people who hadn't earned that trust. The woman I'd become was stronger, more discerning, and absolutely fierce in protecting what mattered most. Jennifer remained our family lawyer, helping us establish legal protections for the twins and ensuring that our experience with Vanessa had been thoroughly documented. She'd become something of a friend through the process, and she often told me that our case had been one of the most satisfying of her career. "You didn't just win," she said. "You transformed a family's understanding of manipulation and accountability." The ripple effects extended beyond our immediate situation. Other family members began questioning dynamics they'd previously accepted, recognizing patterns of manipulation in their own relationships. Marcus's cousin ended a toxic friendship after recognizing similar behavior patterns. His aunt sought counseling for her own marriage after realizing how easily she'd been influenced by Vanessa's lies. As I watched Marcus tuck the twins into their cribs, whispering promises about tomorrow's adventures, I felt a deep satisfaction. That had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. I'd fought for this life, this family, this peace. I'd refused to accept being diminished or dismissed. I'd stood up for my children before they were even born. The scars from that difficult year would always be part of our story, but they were proof of survival, not symbols of defeat. My children would learn from our experience that truth matters. That standing up for yourself is necessary even when it's difficult, and that families should be sources of support, not systems of manipulation. The greatest victory wasn't exposing Vanessa or receiving apologies from family members who'd mistreated me. It was this quiet evening scene, my husband reading to our children, our home filled with laughter instead of tension, our future bright with possibilities that no one could steal from us. I'd learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for glory or recognition, but for the simple right to live with dignity and truth. And sometimes, when you refuse to be diminished, you don't just save yourself, you save an entire family's capacity for authentic love. Has life ever led you to create a family outside of blood ties? I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. In the comments, your stories matter. And if this journey touched something inside you, feel free to support the channel or pass this video along to someone who needs it.